Welcome one, welcome all to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. I am your host Jay Black and I've been forgetting to say that on the last few episodes. But you probably know that from the name of my channel and you probably found me from Twitter anyway, so we're not going to worry about it too much. So today I am talking about writing in first person present. That is the thing I do. And disclaimer, well, two this time. Disclaimer, as always, I am not here to give writing advice. I am just here to talk about my process and what works for me and my craft. If it works for you, that's great. If it doesn't, that's not my problem. Also, second disclaimer, this is not a space to bash anyone's writing processes or preferences, and doing so will earn you a ban. We are not here to make negative comments. We know that topics like this can get really heated and really toxic really quickly. That's not what I'm about. I always just talk about my craft, what works for me, what I like doing. If you don't have this particular preference, if you disagree that I have this preference and you don't like it, you can't cope that other people have different preferences to you, then you need to grow up. There, I said it. Anyhow, getting into the meat of this episode, so to speak. The first thing I want to talk about is this one here in the middle, for those who are watching. Description. Because I did touch on this a little bit in the writing as a pantser episode that will be up by the time this one is. Description changes a lot depending on whose point of view I'm writing from, be that simply the vocabulary they have and the voice they have, but just the words they use can vary quite a lot. I mean, I've mentioned before, I have a really bad habit of not having really any description in my first drafts, and Editor J hates me for it, but I'm not Editor J, so that's, well, it kind of is my problem actually this time around. Oh boy. Existential crisis mode activated. I'm kidding. Am I though? But yeah, description can vary a lot. The thing I've noticed varies the most with description writing first person is descriptions of other characters, particularly love interests. And I've talked about this a little bit on Twitter with Haru in particular, in the sense that he notices eyes and smiles a lot. He's not horny permanently, he swears, but, you know, he is. We won't tell him we know that. He notices a lot about people's eye colour. That's something that he notices about himself as well, because he has quite light brown eyes, which is unusual for a Yuki's man. That's more of a Guian Jongan thing. You know what? I'm going to do what I did in the introduction episode. I'm going to type out Quyen Jong, because I don't know if I'm saying this right, because I don't know Vietnamese pronunciation. If any of you watching or listening speak Vietnamese, tell me how I should be saying this, if it's not just complete freaking nonsense, because it might be, I don't know. Anyway, getting back to description. Yeah, so, Haru notices eyes and smiles quite a lot. Someone like I notices people's hair, whether they have it long or not, and what sort of build people are, and I don't know if this is just I, as a soldier, noticing people's build and who he sees so instinctively as more of a threat, someone big and built like a garden shed, as we say here in the UK, yeah, that's right, I'm not Australian, will come across to him as more noticeable, I guess, more of a sort of primitively speaking a threat, just because they're big and strong. Whereas someone who's a scrawny motherfucker like Hanzo, yeah, that's right, I swear on this podcast, I don't have the capacity to edit out all my swears. I'd be releasing an episode every 10 years, so deal with it. Someone like Hanzo who is scrawny, won't necessarily register in his mind so much. I don't know that he notices eye colour in the same way that Haru does. So, let's get into more what I imagine you're actually here for. Although, I'm sure that was an interesting anecdote. If not, don't tell me because I'm going to cry. I'm joking. Or am I? Why I write present tense. Again, no bashing writer processes. We're not here for that. Nobody's here for that. Nobody wants that. I once read a horror novella, I guess. I cannot remember for the life of me what it's called or who wrote it, and it is genuinely a crying shame that I don't. And it was written in present tense. I believe it was third present, which is a combination you don't see too often. And it wasn't a stunning book in terms of plot or characters or anything, but it was super compelling and super engaging, and I couldn't for the life of me figure out why for ages and ages and ages, because I was thinking about it for a long time, years, genuinely, and I realised that was what it was, is that if it's present tense, you just don't know what's going to happen. What I find with third person, I think this is particularly true of darker literature, which is for those that don't know, that is somewhat of a technical term that generally refers to thriller and horror and suspense. I don't know why I said horror like that. Apparently I'm American all of a sudden. Third person for me implies third person past tense in general really, implies a sense of, well, this has all already happened because it's past tense, but it also, what that means is that actually the main character doesn't face consequences in the same way. You sort of inherently know that they're going to be fine because, well, they've lived to tell you the tale in past tense. I mean, I know that's not always true, but that's very much the vibe I get. Okay, well, but you're telling me this in past tense, so I know you're going to be okay. Whereas in present tense, you inherently just don't have that because it's happening as they speak to you. And you think, okay, so are you going to be okay or not? There's inherently higher stakes there. I don't know if other people find that as a reader and or writer. It'd be interesting to know. Please tell me either way in the comments. Like, genuinely, and what genres you're reading and writing in while you're at it as well. Tie that together because it'd be interesting to know if those do tie. And obviously there's a note here about when I deviate, and this is going to feed a bit more into the later parts, so I'll probably come back to, well, I will come back to this. There are, I think, some genres that do benefit a bit more from past tense. I guess ones with lower stakes. Generally, the one I always think of is fantasy. I don't know why, but I always associate fantasy with past tense. I don't know whether this is just it's sort of easier to describe things in past tense because and fantasy often requires a lot of heavier description because it's usually an alternate, detailed world, really, like, with weird creatures and spells and magic and things that you have to describe, and sometimes in quite a lot of detail, and it's easier to hit the pause button in past tense, to just sort of do that and then move on, which you can't really do very naturally in present tense, because something else is always going on. That's something I like to play with as a writer while I'm describing something else is also happening. So even if that's just a passing mention of, there are three people in the scene, say it's I, Haru, and some other foreign diplomat. Haru's talking to the diplomat, this is from I's perspective, and he's sort of looking around the room describing, and then, oh, I, you're not paying attention to the conversation, are you? And he's like, I totally am, I promise. That's something I quite like to play with in present tense. I think it's really fun, it really adds to the depths of things and realism. In past tense, I don't feel you have the opportunity. But well, that's not true, actually. I'm going to backtrack on that straight away. I'm good at this podcast, I promise. You can do that, but I don't think it comes across as naturally. And I think people assume that you're pressing pause, and it's the thing that people generally do as writers, is to press pause instead. And yes, I get it's easier, but it's not necessarily always the right thing to do. In my humbly massive opinion, as my old friend Deborah used to say. Deborah, if you're listening, I love you. I'm sure you're probably not, but if you are, I love you. So, then we're going to go into why I write first person, and this does tie into that old horror novella I read. That was third person, if I remember correctly, but I do remember thinking, okay, but if this was made first person, once I realised the present tense was the big thing, if this was first person, how much more compelling could this be? Because a lot of reading for me, and this is true of video games as well, particularly if I'm playing on the Wii or anything with motion controls, because that's so much more interactive a lot of the time. And VR as well, I have dabbled in VR. I'll put that out there. But the immersion is a huge factor for me. I always, if something's good, I'm going to get immersed in it. If it's first person, then that's even better because it's a much deeper immersion, be that in a game or in a book or something else. I think that really, really works. And so for darker literature, it makes it that much darker, that much more horrifying in a way. If you're describing, let's take an example, you're describing the aftermath of a torture scene, or even just you're writing a torture scene and it's in first person, then you can really get into the nitty-gritty and the gore of it in immense detail. Or what's really cool is you can also, this is a really good example actually in Haru. Haru really doesn't like seeing blood, he's squeamish in that way, so he'll just turn away, and then you don't have to describe it if you don't want to, if that's what your character's like. If they're not like that and they want to inspect the wound, then you're going to have to go into lots of detail about that, and it'll be horrendous, but it'll have a huge impact on the reader. And it's much more, in my opinion, engaging, compelling, all that. So I just really love writing first person, getting really deep into a character's head, into their internal monologue, exactly what they're thinking in exact moments, without the same sort of narrative interruption that you'll get in past tense and third person, necessarily, because with third person, if you include character monologue, you kind of have to italicize it to make it at all clear without just, and then you often have to include the he thought, she thought, I thought, they thought clause, and it's just kind of uncomfortable, and sometimes, or it can be uncomfortable, there are some people who do it very well, I should mention that. I like sometimes having the blur between, is that internal monologue, or is it not? I like leaving things up to the reader, be that in terms of major plot, major character decisions, or even just if something's internal monologue or not. I really like to do that. I think it makes people think, it gives people different interpretations and all of that goodly juicy stuff, but I think it's just more fun for everybody, to be honest. Times I deviate from first person, I mean, it's very, very, very rare that I do. But I will, when I've written fantasy, that's always defaulted to third person. And I think, again, this is about describing things and hitting the pause button a bit, because if the setting is super detailed, I can just take you all away for a minute and say, okay, here's a really detailed setting, right, now let's go back, in a way that you can't really do in first person, because people notice different things, won't notice X thing, or won't notice Y thing, but will really focus on Z thing, and maybe that'd be really cool in fantasy, and maybe I should experiment with doing that, but that's just not how I've defaulted to doing things, rightly or wrongly. There are more exceptions down here, but I really quickly want to go back to deviating away from present tense, because there is something I forgot to mention in microfiction. Because I will do a big episode on microfiction probably fairly soon in terms of the non-existent schedule. We'll see how many interviews I get and all sorts of stuff like that, so don't hold me to it, but, keep your eyes and ears peeled for microfiction, because there's a lot of overlap with pitch writing, so there's a lot of stuff that will be useful for you, regardless. But when I've been writing a lot of microfiction lately, I've been writing a fair bit of that in past tense, and that's not really a conscious decision, it's just kind of happened that way. I genuinely just don't really know why, but first person past is pretty cool. When I've gone on to edit and develop those microfictions, I've, every time without fail, then converted them to present tense. But maybe I should play a bit more on first pass. I mean, probably not, just because I don't enjoy it in the same way. I think with the microfiction I've been doing, there's been a degree of, because it's auto-prompt images, it's more artificial than my usual creativity. And so maybe that degree of detachedness with past tense, maybe that's where it comes from. We'll see. Who knows, I have written the old one in present tense, so maybe that's not entirely true. I don't know. But anyway, let's move on to these two little notes down here for those who are watching and not just listening. Writing second person. Because I have done a fair bit of this now in my time, not like tons, but a bit, with choose your own adventure type stories and projects like that, because they're good fun. I enjoyed reading those a lot when I was a kid. You don't see that much in adult literature, at least not that I'm aware of. If you know of any good, really good choose your own adventure stories for adults, please, by all means, tell me. I'd be really interested to pick those up. This is probably also me coming at things from a game designer and game player perspective, because for those that don't know, missed it in the introductory episode, I am a budding game designer. And lately in games, there have been a lot more ways to make decisions about how you approach things. And when I say lately, I mean within probably the last 10 years, honestly. But if you think back to like Game Boy Advance days, games were super linear, and now you get games that are wide linear, like Horizon Zero Dawn, where you can choose about who your character develops into a little bit, but how you approach certain things. There are often multiple endings to quests and things like that. I know a lot of people say Horizon is an open world game, but it's not, technically speaking. Some open world games, actual open world games have a lot more of that, where your decisions really do matter, and you can run straight to the final boss and you'll probably die for it, but nobody's actively going to stop you. Like, there's no barrier to that. So that's probably why I sort of ended up writing second person a bit more recently, as in more recently, not more recently. Although those are technically both true, to be fair, not to undermine myself immediately again. I'm good at this, I swear. And choose your own adventure games and things like that, it is sort of linking into what I want to do as a game designer, I think. It's make not necessarily big open world or wide linear games, but games with multiple endings where you can make decisions that actually matter. So very narrative driven and stuff like that. Driven, that's a word apparently. Driven. It was supposed to be, but you know. But your writing second person is a big part of that. Second person present is what I've used. I think second person past can be a thing, but it's... Again, second person, I find it's because you would think, because it sort of sits very nicely between first person and third person, if anything, it's very close to first person. But in terms of the engagement scale, if we're going to have one, tell you what, let's make one really quickly, because I can do that in this software. We've got a line here. and we're going to have most engaging on this side here, and least engaging on this side here. So if I say most engaging is first, I can type, I promise, first present, I'm going to put that as most engaging because that's what it is for me, and obviously everything on this podcast is my own opinion, and if you don't agree with it, then that's your problem. And least engaging is going to be third past. I'm not taking into account future tense because, let's be real, nobody does that. And if you know of an example, please, by all means, prove me wrong. So then we're going to have first past. I'm going to put that on as well. That's consistency. Come on, there we go. I mean, it is significantly less engaging, but not too bad, so I'll put it there. And third present. Oh, that's consistency, damn it. There we go. Let's put that. I think that just looks nice, let's do that. So, second present. You would think, because while it has a lot of elements of third person and a first, and you'd think numerically it sits directly between here, it's actually a lot closer to first person in terms of the way it's written, how it all works, because it's all still very POV heavy, through the eyes type deal. I find it to be, on the engagement, probably more like here on the engagement scale. I don't, well, no, that's more second past actually. Second present, it's very close to third present. I don't find it really very engaging at all. I'm just going to put second past on now for completion's sake. I'll put that there. You can see I really just don't like past tense that much, genuinely. But I don't find second present engaging because, I mean, I saw this thing a while ago that anything in second person is just a lie and gaslighting, and because, you know, you went in the store, no I fucking didn't. And I can't get that out of my head. It was a bit of a light bulb moment where it is true that's like, you're telling me I made this decision or that decision, well, I've seen this other decision, and actually I'll do that instead, but you're not going to give me that option. And I do dislike that very strongly, and maybe there are reasons for that later on in the narrative that I realise actually, okay, that decision wouldn't work, or I visualised this thing wrong, or whatever reason, but I do find it grating if it's done wrong. I'm just labelling the scale. And it does bother me. So, second person, while I do have a very love-hate relationship with it, I guess. Unless the player's hand is sort of forced into you have to make this decision or this decision, then I'm sort of okay with it. Otherwise, not necessarily. The other thing I want to talk about that is related in a sort of much looser way, I guess, is screenwriting. Because that is something I've only really dabbled in at all properly very recently, and I've only just really known at all what I'm doing with it. But it's a lot of fun. And the thing I've done with screenwriting, I did do an extended project on this. I did a sort of dual POV, and it was ensemble cast because of course it is, it's me. But it was dual POV, and the thing with screenwriting is it's a weird mix as a writer of being both inherently present tense, also both inherently past tense, in the sense that you have all the dialogue, all that feels very present tense, and that's all good fun, really enjoy that. But all the description and action and all of that is very distinctly past tense because it's quite literally to the side of the narrative. And it's a really weird balance, and it provides a lot of challenges, but it's also a lot of fun. I really enjoy doing it. I do have plans related to screenwriting. That might be an episode for another time. I think I do have an episode planned where I mention my plans for that, but I'm going to be quite honest, I don't know which one that is, so subscribe so you don't miss it. Haha, plug for the day. But besides the plug that's in every outro, but you know. Gotta earn those YouTuber points, well, podcaster points, well, also YouTuber points, I guess, somehow. But yeah, screenwriting straddles a really weird line between past and present, but it also has, I mean, it is, again, it's inherently third person, really, I feel. If you have done screenwriting, are a screenwriter by trade, let me know your thoughts on this. Do you see it as past or present, or a mix of both, first or third person, or even second person, or some hybrid of those? Then it would be interesting to hear your thoughts on that, if you've dabbled in it at all. Because, I mean, again, as with everything on this podcast, this is my viewpoint. With the exception in terms of viewpoints being, if I have interviewees, isn't that a segue? If you are published or soon to be, please do get in touch. I am at JakeBlack21 on Twitter. That is where I spend most of my time. If my DMs decide they don't want me to talk to you, I don't need to see what you've said to me, no matter what it is, then you can bounce me an email instead. I'm at jade42 black@gmail.com. If you do decide to contact me for an interview, please tell me the title of your book, the age category, the genre, and a little bit about it, be that a blurb or synopsis or something in that vein that is bullet points. All of those things are fine, I really don't care. If you are self or indie pub, you are the people I want to hear from the most. If you are trad pub, that doesn't mean I won't talk to you necessarily. Whether you get on the podcast or not is purely my discretion, because I am the only person that does this. So if you don't like my decision, then really that's kind of not my problem, because you're not going to be on anyway. Abusive, entitled, or rude behaviour, of course, will not be tolerated. If you want to reference this information in the future, it's at the end of basically every episode, and also in the description below. I cannot guarantee anyone a slot for obvious reasons. But that is about all for now. As always, there is no schedule, so we'll see what comes next. And until then, you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a like and or subscribing to the channel if you don't want to miss out on future content. Copyright J Black 2023.